This morning, we are starting a new series as promised. I've entitled it Life Without God, and we're going to be spending the next, 8 weeks, maybe 10 weeks. I haven't figured it out specifically, but we're going to be spending the next 8 to 10 weeks looking at the book of Ecclesiastes. I was telling Stacy last night that as I was preparing yesterday, my initial thought was we're going to make our way through Ecclesiastes, and then as I was diving into this idea of what life feels like without God, I thought, there are a lot of places in the Bible that talk about that. And so while I think we will probably stick to Ecclesiastes, I'm not making any promises. A lot of what I would like to say can be found in the book of Ecclesiastes. But who knows? We may skip around a bit. So I want to focus your attention this morning on Ecclesiastes chapter 1. I'm going to read the first 11 verses. If you don't know where Ecclesiastes is, it's in the Old Testament. It comes after Psalms, Proverbs, is Song of Solomon before Ecclesiastes, or just Proverbs? Thank you, Aram. Thank you. My brother's here. We grew up with the same parents. Yes, it's after Proverbs, okay? So just go to the middle of the Bible, which is where you'll find Psalms, and just keep going a little bit till you find Ecclesiastes. Okay, Ecclesiastes chapter 1. These are the words of the teacher, King David's son, who ruled in Jerusalem. Everything is meaningless, says the teacher. Completely meaningless. What do people get for all their hard work under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth never changes. The sun rises and the sun sets, then hurries around to rise again. The wind blows south and then turns north. Around and around it goes, blowing in circles. Rivers won't run into the sea, but the sea is never full. Then the water returns again to the rivers and flows out again to the sea. Everything is wearisome beyond description. No matter how much we see, we are never satisfied. No matter how much we hear, we are never content. History merely repeats itself. It has all been done before. Nothing under the sun is truly new. Sometimes people say, here is something new, but actually it is old. Nothing is ever truly new. We don't remember what happened in the past, and in future generations, no one will remember what we are doing now. Bleak. I want to start by reading something to you that I wrote a little over 9 years ago. Believe it or not, when people ask me which book of the Bible they should read first, I often answer Ecclesiastes. It is unlike any other. Smack dab in the middle of the Old Testament sits a bombshell of diagnostic brilliance, capable of cutting through our avoidances and suppressions and returning us to reality as it is. Also, unlike most of the books that surround it, you don't need much context to understand Ecclesiastes. It may be the most immediately universal book in the Bible, certainly the most existential. What makes it so timeless is that it takes as its premise the fact that everyone, no matter who they are or what they claim to believe, craves meaning, and they go about life trying to secure it on their own steam. I have yet to meet a person who doesn't want their life to mean something. We all want our lives to count. The yearning for substance is universal and by no means a bad thing. It's part of how we were created. But like all created things, when sin and fear enter the picture, things get murky. Our vision gets skewed. Our backs begin to bend. Ecclesiastes catalogs several of the ways we try to find meaning and life on our own, and as it turns out, they haven't changed much over the millennia. And it tells us what we already know deep down, that none of these things can deliver what we demand of them, that our obsession with controlling outcomes ends up controlling us. The esteemed American writer David Foster Wallace was channeling Ecclesiastes when he observed the following. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. And an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough. Never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you. Worship power, and you will feel weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to keep the fear at bay. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, and you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. So, the question is not whether we yearn for or pursue meaning and purpose. The question is, where are we looking to find it? What are we depending on to make our life worth living? What are we hoping will save us? Is it work, wisdom, our children, romantic relationships, beauty, sexual pleasure, possessions, position, reputation, resume, accomplishments? It could be anything. And as it turns out, it ends up being everything. I wrote that 9 years ago, and as I went back to it this week, I discovered that I believe this even more now than when I first wrote it. If I were to give Ecclesiastes a subtitle, it would simply be The Search. We all crave meaning, as I said. It's natural. It's not a bad thing to crave it. In fact, we were created to experience meaningful lives and meaning in our lives. The question, as I just read, is where are you looking to find it? What are you leaning on to make life worth living? Our lives tend to be so noisy and so filled with distractions that we never stop to even think about questions like that. We never dive under the surface to ask those deeper perennial questions about our internal lives. Socrates famously said that the unexamined life is not worth living, and what he meant was not so much the need to examine things outside of us, but to examine things inside of us. And this is what Ecclesiastes is meant to do. It forces us to examine our interior lives, not what we do, but why we do the things that we do. Not what we feel, but why we feel the things that we feel. Not what we pursue, but why do we pursue the things that we pursue? Why? This is what Ecclesiastes is intended to do. Verse 1 says that the author is the teacher, but he's more like a good psychologist because he asks a lot of probing, deep, perennial, existential questions without giving a lot of answers. He just asks questions. That's how Socrates taught his students. It's called the Socratic method. You just ask questions that force the people you're teaching to think on their own, to probe on their own, not giving answers, but asking questions. So this psychologist, this teacher forces us to think through things like meaning and purpose and identity and existence, those sorts of things that, quite honestly, we don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about. We're busy, our lives are noisy, our lives are filled with distractions and things to do. We're preoccupied with the surface of things, and so we don't typically stop long enough to ask the deeper questions about meaning. Why am I here? What is life all about? Why is it that I feel the things that I feel when this happens or that happens? We don't tend to ask those questions, but Ecclesiastes won't allow us to get away with not asking those questions. Ecclesiastes forces us to ask those questions. He asks questions that push us to look beyond the noise we harness to drown out the pain, that inner hollowness that we so often feel, those voids that we so often try to fill, oftentimes with good things. A key to understanding Ecclesiastes, I would go so far as to saying the key to understanding Ecclesiastes, is to understand the phrase under the sun. That phrase appears 29 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. And what the writer means by the teacher, the psychologist, what he means when he uses the phrase under the sun, what he's describing the way life and this world functions and feels if there is no God. And this life and this world is all that there is. That's what under the sun is describing. It's describing the way this world functions, the way this world feels if there is no God, and the way this life and this world, if this life and this world is all that there is, then all that we have exists under the sun. Not above, but under the sun. And he concludes that if this world is all there is, everything is meaningless. A lot of people misunderstand Ecclesiastes as if this melancholic psychologist, this despairing psychologist, is simply saying nothing matters. Nothing matters. Everything's meaningless. Nothing in this world matters. That's not what he's saying. He's saying if there is no God and if this life and this world is all that there is, then everything is meaningless, he says. Even atheists who are bold enough to be honest have admitted that without God, life is meaningless. I love the book of Ecclesiastes because I was a philosophy major in college, and I used to read really boring, dense books and love it. And one of my favorite philosophers was a 20th century philosopher by the name of Jean-Paul Sartre. He was French. And he was born, I think, in 1905, and I think he died in 1980. He's one of the very few people, I think one of two, that when given the Nobel Peace Prize, refused to accept it. He had his reasons for whatever that is. But he was an atheist, and he was honest. He was bold. He tended to be more bold than a lot of Christians claim to be. And he said this in his book, Existentialism and Humanism. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? You may want to pick that one up from Amazon after church. If you can't find it, I've got a copy in my office. You can borrow it, but I want it back. So this is what he said. God does not exist, and we have to face the consequences of this. It is very distressing to me that God does not exist because all possibility of finding value and meaning in a heaven of ideas disappears with him. Dostoevsky said, if God didn't exist, everything would be permissible. This is the very starting point of existentialism, and as a result, man is lost because neither within him nor without does he find anything ultimate to cling to. That's honest. And he's right. He's absolutely right. If God does not exist, the only place where I detour from Jean-Paul Sartre is his conclusion that God does not exist. But if you take what he's saying to heart, that if God does not exist, everything is meaningless, he's right. There's nothing ultimate to cling to. There's nothing transcendent. There's nothing above the sun. And that's what Ecclesiastes is describing, what life and this world feels like and how it functions if God does not exist. Ecclesiastes reveals the meaninglessness of life without God. And if we take it seriously and if we think deeply about what the psychologist says here, then it will inevitably cause us to cry out, is this all that there is? That's what he wants us to do. He wants to get us to the point where we examine our lives, we examine our pursuits, we examine all of those things where we place ultimate meaning and go, is this all that there is? There's got to be more to life than this. There's got to be more to who I am than just this. C.S. Lewis, lots of quotes this morning, okay? So forgive me, but C.S. Lewis, I think, put it best when he said this. Most people, if they have really learned to look into their own hearts, would know that they do want, and want acutely, something that cannot be had in this world. There are all sorts of things in this world that offer it to you, but they never quite keep their promise. The longings which arise in us when we first fall in love, or first think of some foreign country, or first take up some subject that excites us, are longings which no marriage, no travel, no learning can really satisfy. I am not now speaking of what would be ordinarily called unsuccessful marriages or holidays or learned careers. I'm speaking of the best possible ones. There was something we were grasping for in that first moment of longing, which just fades away in the reality of it. I think everybody knows what I mean. The wife may be a good wife, and the hotels and scenery may have been excellent, and chemistry may be a very interesting job, but something has evaded us. We were banking on those things to deliver something to us that it can't, that it hasn't. And that led C.S. Lewis to conclude that if I find in myself desires which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. Whew. Powerful. And that's the conclusion that Ecclesiastes wants us to come to. There's so much to enjoy in this life. So much. I think I came out of the womb excited about life. The sights and sounds and smells of experiences in this life. Some of them can be transcendently amazing, life-giving. I mean, laughter, love, a sense of accomplishment, sexual pleasure, beautiful beaches, our children, our grandchildren, romantic relationships, good movies, good music, good food, good friendships, sunsets, sunrises. I could go on and on and on about the things that are so enjoyable about life in this world, even though this world is broken, and even though we are broken, and even though everyone around us is broken, there's still so much to delight in this world, so much to enjoy. We all know it when we've watched a good movie, or we've heard an amazing song, or we've tasted some really good food, or had a really good conversation, or watched the birth of our children, hold our grandchildren for the first time. There's so much in this world to enjoy. There's so much magic in this world designed to delight us. What sociologist Peter Berger called signals of transcendence. Things that poke through the clouds into our lives and give us hope and give us pleasure and fuel our desires. None of that's bad in and of itself. Those are gifts, things we get to enjoy. But when we look to anything or anyone in this world under the sun to be for us or deliver to us what only God is big enough to be and deliver, the magic begins to wane. The color starts to fade. That's what C.S. Lewis was talking about. We put all of our eggs in the hope that romantic love will save us. We put all of our hopes in this idea that if I could just travel and see things and experience things, then I would feel rescued. If I could just accomplish certain things in my career and be thought of in a certain way by people I respect, I'll feel like I matter. I'll feel like my life counts. If my kids turn out okay, successful even, I'll feel like a success myself. That will deliver ultimate meaning. And when all of those things happen, if you get the chance to experience any or all of those things, you begin to realize that if you were banking on those things to deliver the ultimate good, the ultimate satisfaction, the ultimate peace, the ultimate meaning, then the music begins to fade. The colors start to get dull. And when this happens, we end up resenting the things and people we are meant to enjoy because they're not delivering what we need them to deliver. They're not saving us. We banked on you to save me and you're failing me. I resent you for it. You know how many romantic relationships and marriages fall apart? Whenever I do premarital counseling, one of the first things I start with is, listen, your spouse is not God. And that means that your spouse cannot deliver to your life what only God can. And if you depend on your spouse to deliver to your life what only God can, you will end up resenting your spouse because your spouse is going to fail you in that regard. There's no doubt about it. We've all failed, and we've all felt those closest to us fail us. And we know when we need those things to save us, it ruins those things for us, ruins them. It puts pressure and strain on our work, our relationships, and our experiences. We need those things to rescue us, and they're not delivering. The color begins to fade. The music dies down. Experts in the field of positive psychology use a phrase, the hedonic treadmill, from the word hedonism. Hedonism is the pursuit of pleasure, thinking that pleasure, wherever it's found, will be the ultimate savior. And they use this phrase, the hedonic treadmill, to describe the way we keep chasing for something more. And then once we get it, we quickly adapt to it, and then we need something even more intense in order to scratch that itch. We're all guilty of this. I'm guilty of this all the time. So whatever progress we thought we may have made, we realize we're back in the same place. In other words, there's no such thing as enough. Someone once said that the loneliest moment in life is when you have just accomplished what you thought would deliver the ultimate and it has let you down. If I could just accomplish this, if I could just secure this. I have a book that's coming out. I don't care if you read it. I just want you to buy it, okay? Just kidding. It's called Carnage and Grace. It's a memoir of the last 9 years of my life. It's raw. It was hard to write. I had to re-experience in some ways the darkest moments of my life. And it was both incredibly difficult and very cathartic and therapeutic at the same time. But it doesn't come out until March. March 5th is the release date. If you come to Fallen and Free, however, there will be 200 copies, okay? But I got mine. I didn't realize I would be getting my copies from the publisher as quickly as I did, but I got mine. Stacy and Jenna and I came home from dinner the other night, and I walked out our front door to go to the mailbox, and there were like 15 boxes stacked up 10 feet tall, and I was, what in the world is this? Someone delivered something to the wrong place, and when I opened the first box, there it was. Now, why do I tell you that? Because I have been somewhat preoccupied with the way I have felt since I held it. I don't think I realized this at the time, but I think I was banking on holding that book doing something for me that it hasn't. Seeing it. Reading through it to see how it feels for the reader. I thought it would satisfy me, make me feel a sense of accomplishment in a deeper way than I've experienced. And that was a subtle sort of revelation to me that unconsciously, in the back of my mind, if you were to ask me, will publishing this book and finally having your hard work in your hands out there for public consumption, will that satisfy you in the deepest parts? I would have said, of course not. It's not capable. But somewhere down deep in there, I was expecting that, or expecting something close to it, and it failed to deliver. Now, I don't tell you that because it's not an exciting book. It's a very, very exciting book, okay? But I tell you that to say we do these things so subtly, so unconsciously. Think about the fights or the arguments you may get into with a romantic partner. Somewhere in that argument, somewhere in that fight, I don't know where, but somewhere in there is an experience of unmet expectations. Somewhere. I was counting on you to be like this in this moment. I was counting on you to respond like this in this moment. I was counting on you to make me feel like this in this moment. And you've screwed me. You've let me down. You failed me. You haven't delivered. We do this so subtly. We do this so unconsciously. But, and here's the good news, when ultimate meaning comes from above the sun, when it comes from God's love for us, God's approval of us, God's friendship and loyalty to us, God's delight in us, when ultimate meaning comes from that stuff, the stuff above the sun, then we're set free to enjoy all the things under the sun without needing any of those things to save us. So, when you consider ultimate meaning coming from above the sun, it actually helps you to enjoy everything under the sun the way it was meant to be enjoyed. They actually become more fulfilling. That's the irony. Nowhere in Ecclesiastes is this psychologist saying, everything sucks. He's saying everything sucks if there's no God. If this life is all that there is, everything sucks and everything's meaningless. But when you peak above the sun, and when your ultimate meaning, when ultimate peace, when ultimate satisfaction, when ultimate security comes from above the sun, from God's love for us and God's acceptance of us and God's delight in us and all of those things, then all of the things we were meant to enjoy under the sun, we can finally enjoy. When we depend on things smaller than God to be what only God can be, life becomes much more disappointing and depressing. Blaise Pascal described all of us as having a God-shaped void in our souls that only God is big enough to fill, and yet we spend our lives trying to fill those things that are incapable of doing the job. Let me conclude with this. I've read this before, and I was searching for a way to land the plane of this sermon, and I kept coming back to this. An old friend wrote this in a devotional years ago. He said, "We all look for it. We all refuse to live without it." What is it that I'm talking about? Well, here it is. All human beings are on a search somehow, some way, to find that solid rock on which to stand. That one thing they can bank on. That one thing that will keep them upright when the storms of life are raging. That one thing that will remain firm for the duration. That one thing that will give them security when nothing else does. That one thing that will finally usher in deep peace. No human being enjoys feeling that he or she is living in the sinking sand of unpredictability, disappointment, and danger with no rock to reach for and stand on. We long for our lives to make sense. We long to have meaning and purpose, and we long to have lasting stability. But in our quest for those things, we try to stand on an endless catalog of God replacements that end up sinking with us. There is, however, a rock to be found. There is a rock that will give you rest when everything else you were looking to for security has been taken away. That rock is Jesus. And you are hardwired to find what you are seeking in him. He is the rock you're longing for. He is the one who alone is able to give you the sense that all is well. So as St. Augustine said, we were made for you, O God, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. This is why Bruce Marshall said, the man who rings the bell at the brothel is looking for God. Ultimately, the man who rings the bell at the brothel is looking for God, trying to find that thing, that one thing that will deliver the goods. But because of what Jesus did for you, the search is over. You have been found. Found. What you've been hunting has been hunting you. And that means that the secret of our search for meaning lies not in our ability or in our brilliance, but in his grace, his one-way love, full stop. He's the searcher, ultimately, the seeker, ultimately. He's the hound of heaven, the one that comes after us, pursues us. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, Psalm 23 says. All the days. Goodness and mercy hunt you. Goodness and mercy chase you. They hound you. So, C.S. Lewis said, modern man loves to talk about the search for God, but that's about as asinine as talking about the mouse's search for the cat. He says, God is the searcher. You've been found, hunted, and everything you've been looking for behind every rock and under every tree has been delivered to you already, free of charge. The keys are already in your pocket. Let's pray together. Help me to believe this, God, because it is so damn hard most of the time. In Jesus' name, amen.